Hello everyone, Michael Irwin here, and I'm excited to be here at the Docker Community All Hands. And today we're going to be talking about composing Kubernetes, and this should be a pretty fun talk. In case you're not familiar with me, you can find me pretty much everywhere on the internet at Mikeser87. With that, let's jump into the slides, shall we? So, in case you're not familiar, Compose has support for a lot of different backends. By default, it uses a Docker backend where it communicates with the Docker Engine API to start up containers on your local machine. But it also has other backends that support other cloud environments so far. One being ACI, so you can use Azure Container Instances, and the other one being ECS. And each will spin up the appropriate services and load balancers and all the other config, and kind of just hide it all away from you. And again, the whole goal and the whole point is to use the Compose spec to define your application and then deploy to a bunch of different areas. And you don't have to know nor care how it happens under the hood. And all these are implemented using custom context in the Docker engine. Now, so Kubernetes is an experimental backend, and I say that because the code does exist in the Git repo, but it's not built and shipped with Docker Desktop. You actually have to go and build it yourself. Unfortunately, it's not too hard to do. So if you want to experiment with it, just clone the Compose CLI project, run make, and it will do the entire build using containers. By the end of the build, you'll have a bin directory that has a Docker binary, and then you just add that to your path or move the binary somewhere onto your path. And at that point, you're able to create a Kubernetes context and get up and going. An example of what that looks like is on the screen here. So I would do a Docker context create Kubernetes. So I'm going to create a Kubernetes context. I'm going to name it localcates, and then the next two flags are specifying the kubeconfig file that I'm going to use, which in this case is just the default one in the home.kube directory. And then I'm going to use the Docker Desktop context sets there. Now, when you launch Kubernetes using Docker Desktop, it will automatically populate the kubeconfig file with this context. So what this is going to do is use the Kubernetes cluster that comes with Docker Desktop. And we'll see an example of setting this up here in just a minute. The way that it works is that this Kubernetes backend converts, more or less, the Compose file into a Helm chart and then installs it. And you'll see one deployment or service per Compose service. And then we'll also create, that should say secrets. We'll create any of the secrets or config maps or other things that you might need in order to deploy your application. And then whenever you do Docker Compose down, it just simply uninstalls that Helm chart. Okay, so let's do a first demo here, in which what I'm going to start off with is I'm going to first create a Compose context, and then we'll just deploy a simple application. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a Docker context create Kubernetes, and I'm going to name it localcates. In this case, I'm not going to give it those extra flags, and what we'll see is that it will actually put us into an interactive mode. In this case, yes, I want to use a kubeconfig file. I don't want to have to define environment variables every time, but if you want to go that way, you certainly can. And then it looks at the kubeconfig file and tells me which context do you want to use. In this case, I only have one, so let's just use Docker Desktop. And at this point, I've got my application ready to go. And all I need to do is tell Docker to use the new context here. At this point, now all I have to do is deploy an application. I have a Docker Compose file here that's a very simple LAMP stack. So I'm going to use this image that I've got. I'm going to do a port mapping, so 8080 of the host, or 8080 of the cluster in this case, to port 80 on my machine. I'm going to deploy 2 replicas of that, and then the database, I'm going to use this that just has some kind of init scripts to create the schema and whatnot, and then specify some stuff. Now, of course, this isn't the right way to define a username and password and that kind of stuff, but this is just an example here. I can certainly do more sophisticated ways of doing that in the future. Now, one of the things I can do first is actually I can do a Docker Compose convert, in which what this will do is actually convert the application. I'll see a README, a chart YAML, and then the actual Helm chart. So I'll see the templates for the service, the database service, the database deployment, and what that looks like. I'll see the app service and the app deployment as well. So I see the service and deployment for each. And one of the things that we'll see is that the deployment service, the app service, is used in a load balancer type. when using Docker Desktop, that'll actually create the port mappings and everything between the VM that Docker Desktop is running in and onto my local host, and we'll see that here in just a second. So if I run Docker Compose up, we'll see it do the convert. It does the install. I have all the container images already downloaded, so this should be really quick. And then I can do Docker Compose ls, and I can do a Docker Compose ps, and I see 3 different containers running, and I can actually do a kubectl get pod, and I'll see matching names there. Some pretty cool stuff. I can do a Docker Compose logs. Let's tail the app logs, for example, and we see all the logs there. Now, if I actually go to my application, let's go split screen here, and let's go to localhost 8080. We'll see that the access logs, you'll see them showing up as well. All right, so let's try actually putting something in my grocery list here, some milk and eggs, or whatever, and we just see that it's persisting it to the database as we expect it to. So pretty cool. When I'm done, I can just do a Docker Compose down, and it uninstalls that Helm chart, and it'll just take it a few seconds for it to go, and everything's gone. So pretty quick, pretty easy, and again, I can use this compose file to deploy my application. Now, there's a couple limitations that come along with this, because Kubernetes is tough. There's lots of ways to do the same thing, and every Kubernetes deployment might do things a little bit differently. The mapping of compose to Kubernetes is tough, and some things are pretty obvious. Okay, I've got a service, I have a deployment. But if I want to customize that a little bit, or add image pool secrets, for example, or other things like that, how do I do that? Or how do I, add my own labels or annotations to everything? There's a lot of things that I may want to customize, and I can't really just do that directly with the Compose tooling. There are a myriad of ways to deploy things to Kubernetes. I can use the Compose tooling directly. I can use kubectl directly. I can use GitOps, and that's actually a big thing that we use here at Virginia Tech, and so we use Flux to deploy all of our applications. So a tool like this doesn't quite fit that workflow, but it would be nice if I could still use Compose to do looking at my logs or exec into a container or that kind of stuff. So there's also a lot of other resources that we can't define because the Compose spec doesn't have a way to define them. So for example, ingress. If I want to say this service should be accessible at this host name, how do I do that? I can't really do that with just the plain Compose tooling here. And so one of the things that I've thrown out a proposal for, and I'd love plus ones or comments or just some discussion on it, is allow the ability for me to define metadata that the Compose tooling can pick up and recognize. And the reason why this is important is because right now, again, the Compose tooling is expecting that it owns the entire life cycle of the application, that it spun it up, it tears it down. But again, recognize we have lots of other ways to deploy applications. It would be nice if I can say, all right, here's a config map that provides some metadata that then the Compose tooling can pick up, and now it shows up in the CLI tooling and everything, and then I can use logs, exec, etc. And this would be awesome if I could do this with ECS or ACI as well. Imagine if I use Terraform to deploy my application, but then I can use Compose to do things. And for us, this is really appealing because we have more or less a platform engineering team that's defining the platform, and then tenants that are running on our platform. And we want to be able to say, hey, use the tooling that you're familiar with. You don't have to learn all this Kubernetes stuff, or if we ever pivot to ECS or whatever else, standardize around the Compose spec, and then we can support anything above that. Okay, all the abstraction layer. So this next demo that I'm going to do here is actually going to use GitOps to deploy our application. The app team writes a Compose file. A CI pipeline converts that Compose file into Kubernetes manifest. In this case, we're actually using a custom Helm chart that just has a bunch of templating and has support for other capabilities. And we'll see some of that here in just a minute. And then finally, once the CI pipeline updates the manifest, Flux sees the changes in those manifests and then actually deploys it. So with that, let's jump over to the GitHub first. So this is the repo, and in case anybody wants to follow along, they can certainly do this themselves. I've already installed all the prerequisites, which puts like a traffic ingress and the Flux controllers and everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the Flux directory, which defines a Git repository and a customization object that will watch this repo and go from there. So let's actually go ahead and do that real quick. And I'm going to switch over here, kubectl, apply my Flux directory. We'll see a Git repository and customization. And in case you're wondering, I do have an alias for kubectl decay. So get the customization, we see things have been applied, and if I get the pods, okay, so everything's up and running. What I'm going to do is actually, we're going to go to Chrome and just see that's working, and I'm going to make a change to my compose file that's going to change the options that we're going to be voting on. So if I go to vote.localhost, I can see cats and dogs, and I can go to results.localhost and see that there have been no votes yet so far. So let's go ahead and make a change to this compose file. I'm just going to do this directly in here, and let's change. And hold 1 second. All right. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so environment. Okay, I was making sure I had the labels right. So let's do maybe favorite dessert. So ice cream or brownies. I don't know. Okay, and let's save this. I'm just going to commit directly to this branch. And what this is going to do is this project is using GitHub Actions, and so this is going to kick off a pipeline that is going to use a custom Helm chart, which I'll just pull up while this is going. So I've got a Helm chart that I call the compose deployer, and I'll put a link in chat here. And what this does is it does the conversion just using straight up templates. And we have support for, you can see the entire compose spec and what it supports. But I have additional support for Docker Compose, which is some of this metadata stuff that we're seeing. I have a forked version of the Compose CLI that I'm going to be showing off here. Port mapping, I've got a AWS IAM role assumption, so I can put a role ARN on the service, and it will annotate the service account correctly. And I can also define x-ingress on the long syntax of a port to say, hey, any request to this host name should go to this port running on this service. And if I specify cert issuer, it'll also set up all the TLS and certificate stuff for it and whatnot. So let's see. Let's refresh this. Okay, so it ran, and if I go back to my code, I'll see that it generated a new manifest about a minute ago, and looking at the manifest, I'll see the service account, and I'll just go to the ingress, for example. We'll see that it created an ingress based on that compose file. And looking at my terminal, if I do a git pods again, we'll see that a couple of them have started up just in the last roughly minute. And let's restart my app, and I see now ice cream and brownies. So again, I use compose to define my application, it deployed it and everything. But now if I go back to, again, this was a GitOps based flow. If I do a Docker Compose ls now, I'll see that, hey, there's a voting app here, and the status is unknown because Helm's no longer managing the application. It doesn't know if it was successful or not. So I just put the status as unknown. Let's see, let's do voting app PS. And I see all the different apps there. I can do a logs of the worker. And if I just go and I'm just going to click on ice cream and brownies and ice cream, and you'll see the logs showing up there as well. And I can do the same thing for exec into the result container. And give me a shell, and now I can do stuff inside that container as well. So again, this ability to extend Kubernetes or the compose and give me the ability to do things that I might not have been able to support other workflows. So if you're interested in this, feel free to +1 or thumbs up the issue. I'd love to hear other ideas of what this metadata should look like, and maybe convince the Docker team to accept this, and we'll kind of go from there. Otherwise, feel free to reach out and keep in touch. And with that, thanks for watching, and hope you have a great rest of your time here at the Community All Hands On. Thanks.